The iPhone 16 Pro can record high-quality professional codecs, such as ProRes. But if you don't know why you're using ProRes over another internal codec, not only are you getting much larger file sizes, you're not even getting better results in some situations. For a lot of people who have been using the iPhone in their professional work environment, you may have found a codec that works for you and it's working perfectly fine. So why touch something if it ain't broke? Well, this may be valid if you're using the same lighting conditions or the same environments day in, day out, and you're looking for consistency. But for us one-man band shooters who are often slaves to the whims of the sun and the ambient lighting, having knowledge of the strengths and the weaknesses of each codec can help ensure that you don't run out of storage space while on a job, as well as helping you save hundreds of dollars in storage space costs. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, why not just use ProRes? It's the strongest, most editable codec on the iPhone, and it could be the very reason why you've bought the iPhone or even clicked on this video. And for you, I have this response. Yeah. Now, if you don't give a fudge brownie about your file sizes, have plenty of space on your iPhone, and happy to wait potentially a few hours to copy and delete all the files off at the end of every shoot, then this video is not for you from here on. ProRes is the strongest codec on the phone, and nothing else is going to beat it. But if you're interested in maximizing the storage space on your phone without losing any noticeable quality, then let's go. It's high efficiency time. Okay, for the first scenario, we have a well-lit environment. This is probably the most common environment you would have on any wedding or event shoot. And we're starting with the 13mm. Now, one thing straight off the bat you can tell with the 13mm app is it's quite sharpened. Very sharpened compared to the other two. That sharpening is also causing some ghosting problems, unfortunately, and I think some detail lost in the highlights. Moving on to the 24mm though, thankfully most of these problems have now disappeared, at least the ghosting has, other than a little bit there on the Leafs. It's still a little bit there on the GoPro, I'm sorry, on the Blackmagic app as well. The over sharpening still is quite prominent. It's also lifting the shadows up a tiny bit as well. You're having a more natural fall off of the shadows here in these other two situations. You could boost it in the H.265 and the ProRes, but it's something you can choose to do later on. In the native app, it does it automatically for you, which, you know, it arguably is what you want. So jumping to the 120mm, very little differences between the three here. The sharpening actually kind of does help the Apple app in this scenario. Yeah, it's probably the least noticeable experiment out of the three, the differences. The bokeh fall off is pretty good on all of them. I'd say a tiny bit better. As you can see, it looks like you're getting some like weird artificial detail there that doesn't seem quite natural, where you're getting just more of a natural fall off on these other two. But honestly, I am picking, very nitpicking right here, to be honest. Okay, moving on to the one-stop overexposed test, 13mm. Again, you have the over sharpening problem in my opinion. And also you're losing some weird detail on the grass. I tried to pull the detail back on all three. Could do that on the H.265 and the ProRes. Couldn't really do it on the native app for Apple. And you're not even getting much, still crushing the blacks here as well. So you're not even getting that shadow detail like you did before. Onto the 24mm, pretty similar story here. Unfortunately, when you're pulling back the highlights, you are still not quite getting all the color information back as you did with the other two apps. The sky is looking fantastic. It's nice and saturated, but I would prefer a flatter image where I'd have more control of the sky. I could boost these other two later on to get a similar result as the native app, but that's about all I have to say for that one. Moving to the 120mm. Barely any difference between these. I'm just going to keep moving on. Okay, so now moving on to the tough lighting scenario that I've set up. As you can see with the native app in the 13mm, it does quite well in the shadows, but it's lost almost all the detail in the highlights. In the H.265 and the ProRes, you can get some details in the clouds here. I'm not sure what's going on here. I've got seemingly sky detail, but it's not proper sky detail. Something weird's going on there. I'm not sure exactly what's happening with the processing. But this is definitely the ProRes is the most natural looking of the three. Okay, moving on to 24mm. This is probably the best result I found actually for the native app. Colors are looking quite good. You're getting some details now in the sky again. With the H.265, looks pretty good as well. You're getting some weird color aberrations going on. And with the ProRes, again, tiny bit better as well, but very similar to the H.265. The only other thing I'd probably say is, as like you're pulling back highlights, it does something weird to the greens in the native app. Okay, to the 120mm test in tough conditions. Native app does a fantastic job at denoising the image naturally. It actually looks quite pleasant. Unfortunately, though, we have no details left in the sky. Okay, onto the H.265, and this is where I find the codec does fall apart, unfortunately. We're getting some weird color artifacts in this side of the window. We're getting some very blocky digital looking noise. Even though we have a good dynamic range, the colors are starting to really fall apart in many areas. ProRes is looking good. The noise is very similar to the Apple app, thankfully, which is much better for denoising in the future. It's much finer grain. It isn't as blocky as the H.265. You can particularly tell it on you looking at the seat down here. Now, if we boost that even a little bit further, I think there's another like 3 stops. You can really see where these codecs are breaking. Highlights completely gone. Absolutely fallen apart. There's the details in the seat and the cups. You can see how there's no information there and you get this weird banding and digital noise. ProRes, fantastic, more or less. It still looks fairly black. A tiny bit of blocking, but looks fantastic. And you're still getting details in the highlights as well. It's probably the best example of where ProRes is strong and when to use it. You want to use ProRes in tough lighting conditions where you'll need to do a lot of recovery, denoising, color management, and corrections. So this is probably the best example between the three, in my opinion. Okay, so my last test was a detail test to see which codec has the best details. In the 13mm, all looks pretty similar. This is probably the least noticeable of the three. When we do punch in though, you can notice the Apple native app does look sharper, but that's digital sharpening. If you like that or you don't like that is another story. Obviously, if you're doing quick turnarounds, sometimes the native app could be better if you want a sharper looking image without any editing. Okay, jumping to the main 24mm lens. This is where I find the differences are quite apparent though. The sharpening's really kicking in for the iPhone, as you can see. The pedals there's heaps of details in there. It's much more of a kind of natural fall off here, in my opinion. Jumping to 2 times zoomed in on the 24mm, this is further exemplifying what I was mentioning before. One thing I've definitely noticed though is the digital sharpening on the native app also adds sharpening to the out of focus areas as well. So this can make your image look flatter, more digitally GoPro-y look. Looks much less cinematic and natural as you would find on a professional camera. And you just don't have as much control as you would like. The other H.265 and ProRes codecs are more or less undistinguishable in this test scenario. Okay, finally we have the 120mm test, and this is where the native app really does start to fall apart. You can see the digital sharpening trying to save it, but yeah, the weakness of the codec doesn't seem to hold up in this situation. We're getting blockiness. It looks kind of low resi, and all the computational stuff just isn't really working as it probably wanted to. The other two look much more natural and definitely easier to match with your professional camera. Just to exemplify that a little bit further, here's the punch in. If all that information about codecs has made you even more confused than before, don't worry, I have you covered. Here's a cheat sheet about when to use which codec in which scenario. Okay, for the Apple app, I'd recommend you shoot in 4K 60 frames per second. This is the same for the other two as well, whenever you can. I'd use this in a everyday scenario if you're out with some friends or you're just in a new environment and you want to capture things quickly but in a high quality fashion. This allows you to turn content around quickly. Everything's pre-sharpened. All the dynamic range is in there. It's highly saturated. Please do not play with the exposure compensation too much. If you overexpose this codec, it does break quite quickly. Now with H.265 or H.264, both are very similar. I'd recommend shooting 4K 60 frames per second and turning Apple Log on, as this is a 10-bit codec. And you can only access 4K 60 frames per second with the Blackmagic app. I'd use this mostly if you're shooting, say, vacational videos, or any outdoor videos that you plan to edit later. This codec will be just as good for 90 to 95% of your wedding and event shoots, as long as there's plenty of light to go around and the lighting conditions aren't tricky. There's no crazy backlight, there's no dark environments, there's no crazy color correction you need to do to the image. And this is probably the best codec. It will give you just as good results in ProRes in good lighting conditions. And you have file sizes that are a fraction of ProRes. Okay, on to ProRes. Now, if you're doing a higher end wedding or higher end professional shoot and you don't really care about storage space, say you got the external hard drive connected to it while you're shooting, I recommend just staying on ProRes if you can afford to do it. This codec is the strongest. It allows you to do the most processing color correction and denoising, which allows you to match that A camera just that little bit better, particularly when the lighting disappears and you need to denoise the image. My recommendation for those professional shooters who can't use ProRes for the entire day is to save it for those important moments in the day, whether that be the aisle walk, the first dance where you might need a bit of denoising, when important talent is on screen on your, say, event shoots, or any important moment in general. Turn on the ProRes. It'll give you that little bit more peace of mind and allow you to match with your main camera a little bit better because you know you're going to use those moments in your final edit. Okay, so you may be a codec commander now with your iPhone 16 Pro, but there's still a lot to learn about how to pair this phone with a camera. To learn about that, check out this video I made about pairing your iPhone with your main camera in a dual camera setup. And if you've liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe. I'd love to do a lot more and teach everyone about solo filmmaking. Because if you don't, I got to go back to delivering groceries for a living. Don't make me sad.